Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing okay. Welcome. Today's lecture is going to be on Hanibal Alkhas, the artwork. Last time we talked about the writings of Hanibal Alkhas, having come from a great family, the son of Rabi Adday Alkhas, the nephew of the great poet John Alkhas. Today we're going to discuss his art, and we're going to make reference, of course, to the literary creations and the blending of literature lines in Assyrian by Hanibal Alkhas within his artwork as well. So you may be asking yourself at this point, why are we studying Hanibal Alkhas in a class on Assyrianism? This is, after all, a sort of the history and the development of Assyrian nationalism, or as I refer to it, a more cultural aspect of it, literary, cultural, artistic aspect to the factors that bring Assyrian people together in the abstract and in a real sense. So the reason that we're studying all of these people is because these are, in effect, the building blocks. And I will remind you of this over and over again in this class. These are the building blocks. They are, if you will, the institutions that bring Assyrians together, in addition to, of course, the institutions that we have, which may be churches, organizations, political parties, associations, on and on, families, of course. All of these play a role in something called banal nationalism, which is, you see the Assyrian flag, you see the Assyrian writing, you don't think much about it. It's not a great effort that people put it out there, but it reminds you that we are tied, all of us, into these kind of anchors, cultural anchors, together throughout the world, whether you're in Australia, you are in Iraq, you're in the United States, you're somewhere in Europe. These symbols and letters, if you will, of the Assyrian language, and references and thoughts and songs and so on and so forth, are what bring the Assyrian people together in this idea of being an Assyrian. So I differentiate between Assyrian nationalism and Assyrianism, and it's a fine line, one could say. But I will today talk about this aspect of Assyrianism, keeping the Assyrian nation alive. And so we are going to look at one of the, I would say, one of the most important persons, one of the most important contributors to what we know as Assyrian culture, and that is Hanibal Alkhas. Now, the role of the artist within this effort to keep a people together, of course, and there are various writings by scholars on this, artists, writers, and so on, play a crucial role in shaping nationalist sentiments, in fostering pride, nostalgia, lamenting the existence of a bad situation, for example, in bringing people together, in exciting fear among people, in building up reverence for our culture and heritage, and so on, in instilling hope in people, finally. So scholars, of course, understand, among them Benedict Anderson, Ernest Gellner, Eric Hobsbawm, and others that we've referred to in this class, all see the role of an artist as a leading protagonist in the creation of this strong imagination that links a people together. So Hanibal Alkhas was such a man, such an artist. And it's important to know Hanibal Alkhas from different aspects, because all of the people that we will get to know who form what we view as the building blocks, the institutions of this Assyrianism, have their own lives. You know, some lived in Iran as Hanibal Alkhas, some had wonderful family relationships, others did not, some were married, others were not. All of these people living in different places contributed to Assyrian literary, artistic, nationalistic efforts to keep alive the idea of their people. Now, one thing to know about Hanibal Alkhas, and this is portrayed, I believe, in his art, is that he was very fascinated and admiring of his father. You could see even in his physical stance here, if you can read body language, he is leaning towards his father. He admired his father a great deal. He was loved by his father. He was the oldest child in the family, Bruna Bukhra, as he himself has said in his poetry. So it was a great disappointment for Adday Alkhas, Rabbi Adday Alkhas, the father of Hanibal Alkhas, according to a poem written by Hanibal Alkhas, when Hanibal Alkhas decides to leave the homeland, to leave Iran, and to make a life for himself as an artist in the United States. He came here, he studied at Loyola, he studied philosophy, he studied art. We talked about that in the first part of this lecture. So I'm not going to repeat that again, but I want to tell you that one of the ways in which Hannibal understood his nationalism, excuse me, had to do with the ties to his father. His father was an important component of keeping him rooted, as it were, in Assyrian society, to stay as an Assyrian. And I referred last time to his poem, and I will refer to it again here because I think it's important to understand the way he thought. And he says to his father, "Accept my greetings." He's in this poem, Urmi, Urmi, Urmi. He is telling his father, please don't be angry at me. Now, this is after his father passes away. Hannibal leaves to the United States. His father passes away in Iran. He comes back and he writes this beautiful poem. He writes others, of course, with reference to his father. And he is asking his father to forgive him. He is hearing his father asking the son who is feeling himself lost in the world, as it were, Ekeved Bruni Chisha, where have you gone, my son? Min Uqruh Shirshuch Prisha, from your roots you have separated yourself. There's something that is burning within Hannibal, and that is the reference to this past, this beautiful Assyrian past that was imagined by his father, told to Hannibal by his father in various literary ways, in personal ways. And Hannibal is enamored with this. Although he goes on to explore the entire world, he goes to Spain, he goes to Italy, comes to the United States, he goes to different parts of Europe, he's in Paris, he's exposing himself to art all over the world and poetry. He's listening to Persian poetry. He is part of the art scene in Iran. He becomes very predominant in his field, yet he is feeling a bit of emptiness because something is missing within him as he explores the world, as he becomes part of the world, as he becomes a well-known artist in the world, and that is the roots that he has in his homeland and the links he has with his father. His father is a very important component in this because he is the inspiration for Hannibal's thoughts and Hannibal's ideas. So what can we say about this Assyrianism that Hannibal was taught? He represents an attempt to keep alive a legacy of Assyrianism within Iranian society at large. Remember, He's a human being. He is exposed to the larger Iranian society around him. He is exposed to the larger artistic community around him, around the world. He is part of the modernist movement, you could say, in art. He definitely rejected Assyrian nationalism as it was advocated by some. The lofty ideas of recreating a homeland, for example. He does not necessarily believe in that. He happened to be a progressive and a leftist in his thinking. This is partly based on my knowledge, my personal knowledge of him as well. He was a part of the world at large, as we said, and he partook in the development of art, but always retained his Assyrianness because he felt guilty for not doing so. The influences of his father and uncle, let's not forget, John Alkhas had also a profound literary impact on Hannibal, as well as I would say, a personal impact on him. His love of his people and nation, and kind of a sad, tragic figure John Alkhas was. He struggled to retain his Assyrian roots. When he was outside, he married a non-Assyrian. He had children. He was living his own life as if kind of to escape from the burden put on him by his father. Remember, he was the oldest son. There's always pressure for the oldest son to perform a certain way, to meet expectations, as it were, of the parents. So he struggled to retain his Assyrian roots and then returned to write and ended his life doing so in a sort of sad lamentation about the existence of his people. And at the end, I will ask for Sarah to help me because I want to play one poem in the voice of Hanibal Alkhas to add to the art that you are going to be exposed to, the images that you're going to see. So Hanibal Alkhas, in terms of his art, he was part of the modernist movement. We're told that there was a triumph of the modernist art over the obsolete, what was known as the obsolete traditional modes of representation in Iran, either miniature or more recent naturalistic painting, resulted from the examination of diverse Western styles and applying them to the Iranian context. So there was exposure to the West in Iran. There was a rethinking of painting at this time. And these trends followed a range of modernist styles from Impressionism and Post-Impressionism to Cubism, Expressionism, Symbolism, and abstract art. And Hanibal Alkhas was representative of a category of artists in Iran, and these are some of them that could be labeled as expressionists and symbolists into symbolism and expressionism. So not realism. These are, of course, movements within art. So we're told that modernist figurative artists such as Hanibal Alkhas, Baman Muhassis, Abdul Qasim Sadi, and Sorab Sepehri advocated expressionism and symbolism. These were the artists who are well known in Iran, and Hanibal wasn't simply known, you see him on the left here, was not simply known by Assyrians. He was recognized and very respected within Iranian artistic circles as well. What is Expressionism? It focuses on the emotional experience over physical reality. There you see Munch's image, The Scream, called The Scream. That's one of the Expressionist paintings. A broader movement that emerged in the early 20th century, started in Germany, and there were a number of others who were labeled as advocates or artistically they were expressionists. Edward Munch was one of them. What is symbolism? Gustave Moreau is one of the well-known symbolic painters, you could say, or advocated symbolism. The emphasis is on the imagination rather than reality. Use of symbolic imagery, as you see in the painting by Gustav here. Dreamlike and mystical quality, focus on the spiritual and sublime. And you're going to see this in Hannibal's artwork. Also influencing Hannibal, we always have to come back to the Assyrian aspect in his life, because his father, who was the editor of Gilgamesh magazine, had such a profound effect on such a profound influence on Hannibal. One of the, as I said, the very first time in Assyrian history when modern Assyrian words met ancient Assyrian art was in the magazine Gilgamesh, which ran from 1950, 1950 to 1960, 1952 to 1961. So you will see that Hannibal is familiar with Assyrian art, and this will come across. He's memorized the style of Assyrian art, or he bends, he reshapes it, he tweaks it, he changes it, he transforms it. But you could still recognize, as you look at these images, and Assyrians are known to do a lot of reliefs, but they were also known to do paintings. So paintings or frescoes on walls, and these are some of the images from Tel Ahmar in Syria. You could see also glazed brickwork among Assyrians, and this is one example. But as I said, a lot of the images that are imprinted in our minds are from Assyrian reliefs, and these are some examples here. The rigid figures, the strong muscular figures of human beings, the very honorable looking, standing upright figures with their shoulders tucked backwards and their heads held high. This was symbolic of the strength of the Assyrians, and this came through in their art. And Hannibal, in his references, in his artistic style, makes definitely returns to this theme of pride and strength in the ancient past. Certainly, it was done by Rabi Adday Alkhas and by John Alkhas, who always compared the modern Assyrians in a lamenting way to the ancient Assyrians in a very admiring way. So John Alkhas, for example, in one of his poems, says to the modern Assyrians, where is your daring? You've lost your daring, to the modern Assyrian, in other words. So this is samples. You'll see a lot of paintings of horses in Hannibal's work. Of course, the winged bull is a symbol that was also recalled, as is the winged, what are termed winged genies or winged figures in Assyrian art. Now, Hannibal, of course, was not the first to duplicate Assyrian art. It's very important to remember that Assyrian art, once it was discovered and shipped to England in 1854, there was this majestic effort to recreate part of the city of Nineveh, a Nineveh courtyard, as it were, in 1854. And it was designed by James Ferguson, along with, of course, the archaeologist who was responsible for bringing back a lot of the Assyrian ruins. And that was Austin Henry Layard, who was not an archaeologist at all, actually. He was an adventurer. But you see here this fantastic effort that was done in London to kind of recreate Assyrian art, because it was so beautiful and it was something to admire. And really, it resonated strength and empire. And you can kind of see that. This, by the way, unfortunately, this entire creation was burned in, I believe, 1861 or 1862, caught fire, and the entire, what you see here as structure, this recreation of an Assyrian courtyard, was destroyed. Also, modern artists like Michael Rakowitz, who is an Iraqi of the Jewish faith, who comes from Iraq, has reproduced Assyrian artwork. These and others like them were placed in the Oriental Institute, what used to be the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago, next to Assyrian ruins. And what Michael Rakowitz was doing with these figures is telling Western, what he terms Western colonial powers, that you've taken according to him, you feel very comfortable in walking around in a museum and looking at these figures, but remember that you have taken these figures, these sculptures, you've stolen them, you've taken them away from their land, and you should not be very comfortable when you are looking at these ancient figures. You should know that these are made of the bits and pieces of a people. You've disregarded their people, but you have taken their artwork. So there's a message behind it. My point here is to say that Hannibal, of course, was not the only one who drew on ancient Assyrian art, was inspired by Assyrian art. This is something that's been going on since the discovery of Assyrian art in the 1800s. But Hannibal definitely, and you see here in this artwork, you see the figures. His art blends time and space together. So you'll see images in as if in one zone and images in another zone, um, largely represented through color. You'll see here the yellow, the red at different times. You'll see figures, very expressive figures, expressing fear or shame or pain. You see the figure here that clearly looks like an Assyrian relief that stepped out from an Assyrian relief, and then you see others that are more sort of realistic, coming together. What's the message here? It's hard to step into the mind of the artist with every image. As I said, I had a chance to meet Hannibal, and I was with him for a few weeks when he was in the Chicago area, and I spoke to him and corresponded with him. Whenever I would ask him about his art, he would always say something like, "Why don't you interpret that your way?" And many artists do that. Some go into detail about what it is they're trying to portray, and you might say to yourself, well, that's not what I see something different. But with Hannibal, he was always allowing you to interpret. He would give you a clue, and then it was up to you to interpret. So can we interpret this one way if we are in a certain mood, or if we have certain experiences in life and interpret it a different way? Absolutely. Definitely, the Assyrian theme always comes through: his love for his culture, his admiration of his culture, his lamenting of his culture, his love for Assyrian literature. It always comes through in his paintings. Um, like I said, Hannibal was, although he was a visionary, he was a very thoughtful, sensitive person. Um, he did not like the idea of being involved so much in an archaic way of thinking that we have to create a country, otherwise there's no other way to live as Assyrians, and we have to fix it this way. He did not have much, I don't want to say respect, that's the wrong word. He didn't have much belief in that way of thinking. His way of thinking was that we have a powerful culture that we need to advocate. We have beautiful art that we need to advocate. We have wonderful literature. We should know our language. We should know our culture. We should know our art, our dances, and so on and so forth, and we should practice them. And he also, as I said, was very progressive in his thinking. So in this poem, I he also had a great deal of sense of humor. Let me just read you this line in the beginning of this poem. The poem is the story of a group of people who are engaged in this discussion, paralysis by analysis, as it were. They're really paralyzed as a nation. They're representatives of a nation, and they're kind of the old guard. They're the elders among the Assyrians, and they're sitting around talking these big ideas, and they're unachievable, these ideas, but they're just kind of dreaming, and they're trying to save the nation this way, and they're passing the wine around, and each in his turn says a few things. And so Hannibal mocks this, and they each refer to a great leader, Hitler, Stalin, Roosevelt. If I was Hitler, if I was Stalin, if I was Roosevelt, this is what I would do. This is how I would solve the problem of the Arabs, Turks, or Kurds, or Muslims. This is what I would do to them. All of a sudden, a young man appears by the name of Ashur. Now, their names are typically old Assyrian generation names. His name is a new generation name, Ashur. Ashur was not a common name among the Assyrians in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And he's upset that his mother and his sister have to carry a lot of water to this village as these men sit around basically doing nothing but engaging in this futile discussion of if only we were this or that. He suggests to them, why don't we dig a channel or a waterway and allow our women to rest so that we don't have to tire so much, and this will save us a lot of effort. We could relax over the years. And then he is, of course, chastised by these elders. He's told, you're a young person, you don't understand. We're thinking of big ideas here. You're talking about small ideas. And then he is supported by someone else. So I just want to quote, because it's just reading it in Assyrian, it's really hard to translate. So I'll read it in Assyrian for you, and you just listen to the rhythm of it. Chayuma Dawud Dadishu Isha. Ishaya Pius Yuchanan Misha. Iramia Paulus Georgis Tuma. Oraham Ischak Mikhail Shuma. Khwardikne Sawe Guranet Beta. Tiwewa Ilrumta Bligib Makyabta. So one day in this village, David, Dadishu, Ishaya, and all these names, which are typically old Assyrian names, Paulus, Iramia, Georgis, Tuma, Oraham, Ischak, Mikhail, Shuma, all biblical names, all these old names, Tiwewa and Bligib Makyabta, they're deep in this discussion. So after Ashur, I'm not going to read the whole poem here. This is just to expose you to his ideas and the way he thought about things. After Ashur comes and he tells these people he's chastised, and then we are told an elder who waited and he heard this exchange between these elderly people and this young man who's suggesting a new way of thinking and doing. He rises to his feet, and he forbids Ashur from being alone. In other words, he supports him, and in a loud voice he says, and Hannibal says, this golden line worthy of poets. Aha jarga dawa, aha jarga dawa, khshikha mashuche. Alpoche qasra, al-sila beta. Kibani Sechle Bligib Makyabta. Upon the wind, a castle, upon sands, a house, builds a fool busy with discussion. Build fools, busy with discussions. I retranslated I put it in just to have a better ring in English. On the wind, they build a castle, on the sand, a home, fools who are busy with talk as their discussions roam. So this gives you the idea that Hannibal although he was a visionary, although he was engaged in the creation of beauty, lamentation for his people, putting forth literature in his paintings, aspiring to inspire Assyrians, doing all of this stuff, he had no regard for this type of nonsense where we talk about let's do these big things without really preparing. In other words, he was not involved in illusion, and he didn't like this way of thinking. Here's an image that he painted that has a lot of feeling and pain in it about Semele. And below he writes, Baqar min Sahde min Yimme, ask the martyrs, the mothers. Baqar min Qime min Dimme, those who have risen from the blood, ask them. So you see the image of pain and suffering. He has a style of painting, as we said, these layered styles in different colors, and it's possibly a reference to like different zones. This is something called Zugrat of Love, which is a larger painting, watercolor with various images. Again, you see the symbols, the Assyrian symbols. At the bottom left here, you see the symbol of the god Ashur, and figures all around. Of course, it is twisted, it is changed, it is transformed, but you nevertheless see the Assyrian art, ancient Assyrian art, and you see almost Assyrian figures moving about. There is, of course, an influence of, one could say, Picasso and Chagall and others, expressionists, but you also see the Assyrianism coming through. And here it is again, an image of what looks like an Assyrian king in the main figure here in the front, and then you see it repeated again over and over again. And then, of course, you see the hands of Christ there, crucified. You see the influence of European art. Hannibal always made it a point to typically write his name in Assyrian on many of these paintings. Venus or Ishtar, again, you see the winged bull portrayed in his paintings right here. Assyrian figures here and possibly here with the braided beards. Ancestor, I looked at this painting very carefully. You see, obviously, Assyrian styles in it. And, one could read possibly his own regrets, what he called his faults and his sins and his mistakes in life when he left his father and his father passed away. So one could possibly read that in these with various motifs, Assyrian motifs here, the flower. Assyrian king looks at Matisse. It's very interesting. Here he reproduces Matisse and with an Assyrian king looking at it. What was Hannibal thinking? Of course, his identity is very important, but he is also admiring European artists or other styles. So you see again, Assyrian images here and here, the horses. And as I said, many times these layered paintings of Hannibal portray different time zones. You can kind of guess what's going on. Here, he writes in Assyrian, that castle which reached the skies, O qasra mutyal al-qi'a, in Assyrian he's written there, was not blessed. Lewa burha. What does he mean when he says this? Perhaps each time you come and you look at this particular painting, you may think something different. Here, you see again this layered kind of existence, peaceful existence, conflict in the yellow here, and then a reflection and the figure is writing in the Assyrian language here in this painting. See here again, a layered expression. You see conflict at the bottom, an aspiration at the top, and then kind of peaceful existence below. Here we may be able to read this. Of course, this is our interpretation. You see, first of all, he's signed it again as typical in the Assyrian. The symbol here is of a galloping figure. Perhaps it's himself. He's galloping towards perhaps another land. And then the same figure, his marriage, either to the Assyrian, he's married twice. When he remarried, he married an Assyrian woman in Iran. You see here the figure holding tightly a tree. What's he gripping? Are these his roots? Is this a symbol for his homeland? Is the figure concerned? Is he turning away from love and to be concerned more about his roots? Certainly, you could make the argument that his Assyrianism is coming through many of these paintings. He's not someone who feels that his experience, his father, his homeland, his people have been forgotten. And to highlight this point, Hannibal created a masterpiece of a mural, a work of art, which is in Iran. It's a 15-panel painting of the Assyrians. On the extreme right here, you see, and I'll go into, unfortunately, I don't have a very detailed picture, I wish I had, of this entire painting, but there are various events here. It's sort of the history of the Assyrians as told to Hannibal by his father and uncle. You see here, his father is seated, and there's a grapevine growing, and the children are happy. His father Rabbi Adde Alkhas had talked about the sweetness of the grapes of their home when his mother would collect the grapes and would make wine sometimes from them. So there's this village life scene here. There's a happy scene here. Assyrians are dancing. There's village life that is portrayed, and then there is death, and there is suffering among the Assyrians. You see a dark figure here holding on a spear the figure of a dead, possibly child, as obviously a symbol of the Assyrian genocide. And then you see the figures of Daniel Benjamin, of William Daniel, Adde Alkhas, his own father. You see the image of his father here with Hannibal as a child, a baby, on a high chair with his mother and father here, bride and groom, and their old house is painted here. You see the literary efforts made, and then of course you see the gravestone of his father is right here, and I'm going to focus in on it. And then to the extreme left, you see Hannibal and his family standing, and he's standing with a brush. In typical, this is typical with many Iranian poets and artists, they include themselves in the poem, especially at the end of the poem. O Haqiyana, O Sayyara. Here's an image. You see a person here standing in front of it, just to kind of get an idea of the size of this painting. From what I understand, it's considered a very important piece in Iran, recognized. Of course, the Iranian people recognize Hannibal as one of the greatest Iranian painters and sculptors, and they do recognize his Assyrian heritage and respect it. Here's a photograph of Hannibal among other admiring artists and people visiting, and you can see kind of the scene here of Assyrians dancing, and then the colors change and there's a transformation in the story, and you see death and destruction um, uh, as the times change. Here again, excuse me, is the grave of his father painted here. Here is an image of the great literary masters among the Assyrians. Above them, very important, by the way, to note that Hannibal always respected women. He respected his mother a great deal. He respected women. He was for the rights of women. So you see, right by or above the Assyrian literary figures, these great men of Assyrian literature, Nimrud Simono, Adde Alkhas, Kurish Benyamin, um, William Daniel, Zaya bit Zaya, all these great Assyrian men who produced Assyrian literature. Next to them or above them are Assyrians making dolma, Assyrian women making dolma, who are just as important in this whole story for Hannibal. Here you see an image of a grave. This is perhaps Hannibal's father looking at the grave of his mother, meaning the grandmother of Hannibal with his father, because she died when he was young. And here you see the dark figure who's almost not human in the way he's portrayed, holding on a sort of a spear or a hoe, holding the death of a dead child. And you see Assyrians being persecuted. You see mothers screaming. Um, you see girls. One girl is holding up a fist in defiance, as it were. And so for Hannibal, this was not only a period of sadness, but it was also defiance, um, and a mother with her children um, asleep here, um, thinking about her children, caring for her children, and there's obviously death and destruction. And the painting contains the color red for blood. Again, an Assyrian image portrayed here. I found this very interesting. This watercolor again, Hannibal. This is painted in 2000. Hannibal writes in Assyrian. He's a great advocate of Assyrian literature. Thinks that Assyrian ought to survive in his paintings. And this one I found very interesting. He says, "Shuqtane qatuh sayara." Let the painter tell you. You mushkhate أو بار شرارة داخي صدام بيشة خمارة بشاوق الأطرن هاوي مارة. Let the painter tell you in his poem reflecting the truth, how can the evil jackass Saddam we can permit to rule over our country? So I thought that was very strange for Hannibal, because he was not overtly involved in politics. He was covertly involved in politics, and in his paintings, for example, he pushes Assyrian rights, women's rights, and so on and so forth. Here you see the image of a ziggurat. Here you see images of ancient Assyrians reflecting, um, the Assyrian past, the Assyrian character that he wants to portray as far as Iraqi politics. And then, of course, you see various figures, perhaps representing strength of a bull and other animal figures. Again, you see Assyrian themes here, especially with this figure below, typical Assyrian style. Again, Hannibal signs it in the Assyrian language. Hannibal's images also contained faith. Here's a cross and the Assyrian flowers or Assyrian images, Assyrian motifs, along with a church. This is a very beautiful image here. Here you see he's written in this painting, and I'm going to go to the detail here. Atur, khubba, atur, and then repeated again. Love Assyria, love Assyria, love Assyria, love Assyria, so on and so forth. So, and then the female figure, her name is Aturina. It is written backwards and forwards. And I thought this was a very interesting image. It just shows you that Hannibal may have left to go to America, left his homeland despite the wishes of his father, may have married a foreigner, may have departed from his homeland, but his homeland never departed from him. Again, Grishli Jarga Tpeshi Minni Khatkhara Lishqala ويل مبوعة خبة وشرارة. So in these paintings, we see Hannibal. Of course, you know, we could look at these images over and over again and see that Hannibal was, in his art, in his portrayal, he was a man of the world. He was someone who was exposed to different art forms. He was also a philosopher. He was definitely had studied philosophy and art together. And there are so many layers to understanding Hannibal's art. But one thing constantly comes through and is of concern in this class, and that is that although he was fascinated with humanity, fascinated with the rights of women, an advocate for the downtrodden, definitely progressive in his thinking, yet he was always rooted, and I shouldn't say yet, but always rooted in a very, one could say, conservative way, although he was critical of more of the elders of the community, but rooted in Assyrianism. He loved it. He cried for it, he lamented over it, and he sought to inspire Assyrians to become better Assyrians, to become more learned Assyrians, to become more educated Assyrians, to be more familiar with their art forms, with their language, with their literature, with their culture, with their history, and so on and so forth. And he did the best he could in all of the years he existed, especially his later years. So here he's lamenting the existence. This is later in life in California. He's kind of lamenting the existence of the Assyrians. And I just shortened this poem. It was translated by Rabbi Yosef Bit Yosef and Savina Dawood. But I wanted to translate it so it could ring more easier in English. Let's put it this way. The birds are not flying in the sky. What happened to wings? No books in schools. What happened to teachers? Lovers depart from each other. What happened to warm kisses? Broken are the pencils of writers from fear, and no one dares to sharpen. Gilgamesh's, Enkidu's, Banipal's Assyrian names, where are they now? The unworthy are victorious, proud and famous. What of those who oppose them? No difference between night and day, and life grows more difficult. What of the outcry and revolution? And so this sad poem from Hannibal, what happened to those poems bursting with hope? So he's writing later in life, and it's indicative of his sadness over the plight of his people. He had expressed to me a number of times, although he had hope constantly, his creations, one could see, although they lament the existence of the Assyrians, are many times still hopeful. He did express a lot of reservation or hopelessness about the situation. There's his signature. I always love seeing his signature written in Assyrian. Sometimes his entire name is written, sometimes just the he of Hannibal and Alkhas. sometimes in both languages, in Persian and in Assyrian. Um, but what I'd like to do now, if possible, is have you listen to a poem that, and to kind of lead us out, that he portrays kind of the state of affairs of the um, Assyrians. So I want to play this for you. It's only a couple of minutes. Um,
ليلة مليا شليوتا لبي شليا بمليوتا غمزة ورازة خيوتا تخموني بن تخموني غبت أمتي خلتنتا طويلة بنت تخمنتا بصورة الغداس المنطة هموني بن هموني خلطة برخات تخشلي سوريات السدي تجرشلي كخربات تبرشلي خجبوني بن خجبوني من يلبان الدجتابة من نسيان الخشبابة من جرج كتيب بدابة مديوني بن مديوني شتف مشخات خاتت يتفي جوج ستواتي سبتي كشبرة بناتي تنتوني بن تنتوني يا بن هيوي الخشنتا يرمى روحه بتخمنتا صلمي بدشتا شمنتا مقيوني بن مقيوني ليش طاوت شوشاطة ومايل بدبابة شماطة أخيوتا خبلاطة صرموني بن صرموني زيكاتي جابي نويرة من قيود الصخلة وتشورة أفرانيبا التانورة تنتوني بن تنتوني.
so I wanted to share that with you because it was, for me, a very telling moment. He kind of talks about his entire life. He recites the fact that he's made mistakes in his life. He's painted a bunch of ugly paintings. He, by the way, told me that, for example, he was very proud of his art, and he said, I have this, my hand shook, and I took advantage of it because I wanted to portray something in my art. So he used his entire self, his thoughts, his body, to create the artwork. And here he says, Syria, shikla Syria tinwida, um, ugly pictures that I painted. But he talks about his life, and that he tried the best he could to teach the girl, to uplift her, to have her think in a high way, in a thoughtful way, in an educated, civilized way about life. And he loves his nation most of all. Umti khiltanta, he says, my nation that is powerful, that is strong.